The scan came back wrong, and listener ninth knew it the instant the numbers bloomed across the shared mind. 40,000 Vol minds felt the same readout at once, the way a single body feels a needle. The object in the dark between the outer beacons was a ship. That much the Concorde agreed on in the first heartbeat. But the mass was wrong. The heat was wrong. The shape returned no match against any hull in the long memory. And the long memory of the Vol Concorde stretched back 900,000 years and held the silhouette of every vessel that had ever crossed their space. This one was not in it. Listener ninth rode inside the scout mind threadbare, a thin survey craft barely longer than a watchtower, and the scout mind had been laughing only a moment before. The Concorde did not laugh the way soft species laughed, but it had a feeling close to it, a warm ripple of shared contempt, and that ripple had been running through 40,000 linked observers when the readout first appeared. A single hull, one, drifting in toward the Meridian belt with no escort, no fleet, no banner, no answer to the standard hail. The Concorde had met species like this before, the brave little ones who sent a lone ship to speak for a whole world, and the Concorde had always enjoyed the way those ships went quiet. So the order had been given as a joke: scan it, strip it, measure the small thing and add it to the memory and move on. The scan was running now, and the joke had stopped being funny. Mass reads as a moon, said the cluster voice that the Concorde used when many minds spoke as one. The words formed inside listener ninth without sound. The sensors are returning a moon. Correct the sensors. The sensors were not wrong. Listener ninth checked them 3 times in the space of a breath, because 3 of its sibling minds checked them at the same instant and shared the result. The ship out there in the dark was 4 kilometers from prow to stern. It massed like a small moon because it was built like one, layered hull over layered hull, the metal stacked so deep that the scanning beam went in and did not come all the way back. The Concorde had ships of its own that long. It had perhaps a dozen of them, and every one had taken 100 years to grow, and every one was the pride of a whole Hive world. This thing had arrived alone, as if it were nothing. "Read the markings," the cluster voice said. "Find the registry. Find the maker." The markings were faded. That was the next wrong thing, and it landed across the shared mind like cold water. The hull was old. Not old the way a tomb is old, sealed and dead, but old the way a working tool is old, scarred and patched and used. The scanning beam crawled along the flank and found weld seams over weld seams, plating that had been holed and sealed and holed again in places, scorch marks layered 3 deep where weapons had struck the same armor across what must have been many separate wars. Whole sections of the prow had been ground smooth and rebuilt. The ship had been hurt, many times, by many things, and every time it had been repaired and sent back out. Nothing in Vol space hurt a ship and let it leave. Listener ninth felt the contempt drain out of the shared mind, and felt something colder pour in to fill the space. 40,000 observers were now looking at the same hull and arriving, slowly, at the same impossible thought. A ship that big should not move alone. A ship that scarred should not still be running. A ship that old should be in the memory, and it was not. The Concorde turned the problem over, the way it turned over everything, methodically, certain that method would crack it. It compared the hull to the 12 great cruisers of the Vol, and the comparison only made the wrongness worse. The Vol cruisers were grown, each one cultured over a century from living metal, smooth and perfect and identical. 12 copies of one design that had never needed to change, because nothing had ever defeated it. The thing in the dark had not been grown. It had been built and rebuilt and built again over the top of itself, every panel a decision, every scar a story, the work of many hands across many years. It was not one design. It was 100 designs layered into one ship, each one the answer to a different wound. The Vol made their ships perfect once. This species had made its ship perfect 1,000 times, and was clearly still making it perfect, because the scanning beam found work crews even now, tiny heat signatures moving along the outer hull, patching, welding, tending the great gray body as it came on. "It carries a name," said one of the sibling minds, a young surveyor called Brightwater Sixth, and the whole Concorde turned toward what it had found. The name was etched along the prow in 2 scripts. One was a tight geometric pattern the Concorde could not read. The other was a set of plain marks, blocky and worn, and the translation lattice chewed on them for a long moment before it produced a sound the Vol could shape. Cold Meridian. The name meant nothing to the Concorde. The memory held no entry. There was no maker world attached, no fleet sign, no record of a first sighting, no record of any sighting at all. As far as the 900,000-year memory of the Vol Concorde was concerned, the 4-kilometer warship now sliding through their outer beacons did not exist and never had. Listener Ninth had spent its whole life inside that memory. The memory was the Concorde. To be Vol was to share every fact the species had ever learned, to carry the whole long catalog in the back of the mind at all times, so that no Vol was ever truly alone, and no truth was ever truly lost. The memory was the reason the Concorde had ruled the Meridian belt for so long. It had a file on everything that had ever threatened it, and it had a file on everything that ever might. It had no file on this. "Hail it again," the cluster voice said, and now the warm ripple of contempt was entirely gone, replaced by the flat, careful tone the Concorde used when it did not yet understand a thing. "All channels. Demand its origin." The hail went out. Listener Ninth carried it, threw it across the gap, layered it in every code the Concorde knew. Identify your vessel, state your maker world, submit to inspection, or be marked hostile. The cold Meridian did not answer. It did not slow. It did not turn. It came on at a steady crawl, the way a glacier comes on, and the scanning beam kept crawling its flank and kept finding new things to be afraid of. There were gun ports along the dorsal line, and the gun ports were closed, and the closed gun ports frightened the Concorde more than open ones would have. Open guns meant a threat made ready. Closed guns, on a ship that size, meant the crew did not consider the Vol worth opening them for. "It is not arming," Brightwater 6 said, and the young mind's words shook in a way that spread to the others. 40,000 of us are watching it, and it has not armed. "Because it does not need to," said another sibling, an old observer named Stillwater 3rd, who had ridden survey craft for 200 years and had a slower, heavier presence in the shared mind. "Look at the wear on those guns, child. Look at how many times they have been fired and rebored. That ship has not armed because arming is the last thing it does, not the first. It is still deciding whether we are worth the trouble." The shared mind recoiled from that thought and could not let go of it. Listener Ninth pushed the scout mind threadbare a little closer, against its own better judgment, because the Concorde wanted to see, and what the Concorde wanted, every mind in it leaned toward at once. Closer in, the wrongness only deepened. The cold Meridian was not a smooth thing. It was a city turned on its side and made to fly, a sprawl of towers and batteries and sensor masts and great blunt engine cones, every surface dense with detail, every panel a slightly different shade of gray, from being replaced in a different decade. Lights burned in 10,000 small ports along the hull. The ship was crewed, it was awake, it was lived in, and it was steering. The slight, constant corrections of a hull under intelligent command, a hand on the controls somewhere deep inside all that metal, a crew going about its work, as if 40,000 Vol minds were not staring at them in growing dread. "Pull the survey craft back," Stillwater 3rd said. Listener Ninth did not. Not at first. Because the cluster voice spoke over the old observer, and the cluster voice carried the will of the whole Concorde, and the whole Concorde still wanted, more than it wanted to be safe, to know what this thing was. "Full scan," the cluster voice said. "Deep penetration. Read its reactor. Read its magazines. Read everything. We will not have a ship in our space that the memory cannot name. Open it to us." So Threadbare opened its main array, the heavy survey beam the scout craft used to map the insides of dead worlds, and it pointed that beam at the cold Meridian and fired it at full strength into the old gray hull. For a long moment, nothing happened. The beam went in, the readings began to come back, layer by layer, deck by deck, and Listener Ninth felt 40,000 minds lean in to read them together, hungry, certain that knowing the thing would make it small again. Then the cold Meridian noticed it was being scanned. Listener Ninth felt the change before any instrument showed it. A pressure, faint at first, like the moment before a storm when the air itself seems to listen. Deep in the old ship, something that had been resting began, slowly, to wake. Power readings that had sat low and steady for the whole encounter began to climb. Not fast. That was the worst of it. They climbed the way a tide comes in, without hurry, without doubt, a vast reserve of force being woken, not because the ship was afraid, but because the ship had been asked a question and had decided to answer. One light on the prow of the cold Meridian, near the worn letters of its name, flickered and steadied, and turned from cold white to a deep, patient red. "It is looking back at us," Brightwater Sixth whispered into the shared mind. 40,000 Vol observers, who had begun the watch laughing, felt the same thing at the same instant, and there was no word in the long memory for it. For a long moment, the Concorde simply held that red light in its many eyes, and did not know what to do with it. A light was a small thing. The Vol had catalogued 1 billion lights across 900,000 years, the lights of engines and reactors and signal lamps, and the dying flares of stars. There was a file for every kind of light there was. But this light was not in any file, because it was not a light meant to be seen. It was a light meant to be understood. It said, plainly, in a language that needed no translation lattice at all, that the thing wearing the gray hull had finished waiting, and had noticed, and had decided to look back. Listener Ninth had spent its whole life as one small part of a great certain whole, and certainty had always felt like warmth, like the press of 40,000 minds agreeing on the shape of the world. Now, for the first time, it felt the certainty thin. The other minds were still there, they were still agreeing, but what they were agreeing on, all at once, was that they did not understand. And a thing that many minds agree they do not understand is far more frightening than a thing one mind fears alone. The fear pooled and doubled and pooled again. The shared mind, which had always made every Vol braver by spreading its courage thin across the whole, now made every Vol more afraid by spreading its dread the same way. "Withdraw the survey beam," Stillwater Third said quietly, and this time the old observer did not phrase it as an order, because the Concorde did not take orders from one mind. It phrased it as a plea. "I have ridden these craft a long time, longer than most of you have existed. I have seen the things that live between the stars, the cold, patient ones, and I have learned the one rule that has kept me alive through all of it. When a thing far larger than you notices you, you stop touching it. You go still. You become uninteresting. We are not being uninteresting. We are shining 4 beams into the one thing in 900,000 years our memory cannot name, and it has just turned a light toward us to let us know that it knows." The cluster voice did not answer the old observer. It did not need to. The will of the whole had already decided, in the way the whole always decided, by simply being more than any single voice within it. The beams stayed on, and out in the dark, the thing wearing the gray hull went on coming, in no hurry at all, the way a debt comes due. The red light on the prow held steady, and the Concorde did the one thing it had never once done in 900,000 years. It hesitated. Listener Ninth felt the hesitation move through the linked minds like a crack moving through ice. The Vol Concorde did not hesitate. That was the whole point of being many minds in one. A single Vol could doubt, could freeze, could be afraid, but the Concorde pooled every mind together and acted as one body with one will, and that will had never wavered, because it had always known more than its enemy. Knowledge was its armor, the memory was its god. And the memory had nothing to say. "Cut the scanning beam," Stillwater Third said. The old observer's words came slow and heavy and certain. "Cut it now, child. We have woken it. Stop pouring force into a thing that is answering force with force." But the cluster voice would not let go. The will of 40,000 minds was a hard thing to turn, and most of those minds were still angry, still proud, still certain that whatever the cold Meridian was, it could be measured and filed and made small. The scanning beam stayed on. It dug deeper into the old gray hull, and the readings that came back stopped making sense. The reactor, when the beam finally reached it, did not read as a reactor. It read as a hole, a place where the instruments simply stopped, where the survey beam went in, and was swallowed, and returned nothing, as if the heart of the cold Meridian were a piece of space that had been folded shut. The Concorde had names for many kinds of power. It had no name for a power that ate the beam sent to look at it. "That is not possible," said 100 sibling minds at once. "It is sitting in front of you," Stillwater Third answered. Listener Ninth tried to hold all of it at once, the way a Vol mind was built to, and found that it could not. There was too much wrong. The Concorde had a process for the unknown, a clean and ancient process, refined across 100,000 encounters. First you scanned, then you matched. Then, if the match failed, you measured until a match could be forced. Because everything in the galaxy was made of known parts, arranged in unknown ways, and a thing made of known parts could always, in the end, be filed. That was the deepest faith of the Vol. There were no new things. There were only old things the memory had not yet caught. The cold Meridian was a new thing, and the process, meeting a new thing for the first time in 900,000 years, had no next step. The Concorde pushed harder anyway, because faith does not stop the moment it is proven wrong. It is a creature of certainty, and certainty under threat becomes stubbornness, and stubbornness becomes the thing that kills you. 3 more survey craft slid in alongside Threadbare, each carrying its own cluster of observers, each opening its own heavy beam, until 4 scanning arrays were burning into the cold Meridian at once, and the old ship was lit from 4 sides by the probing light of a species that could not believe what it was failing to learn. The cold Meridian let them. That was the part Listener Ninth would carry forever, in whatever fragment of the memory survived this day. The great ship let 4 Vol survey craft pour their full deep scan into its hull, and it did not flinch, and it did not arm, and it did not run. It simply kept climbing, slow and sure, that vast swallowed power inside it, rising and rising, while 40,000 minds watched the numbers, and felt their certainty drain away 1 decimal at a time. The numbers were the thing that broke the Concorde's nerve first, before any weapon fired. The Vol lived by numbers. Numbers were how the memory held the world, and the numbers coming off the cold Meridian had stopped behaving like the numbers of a ship. Its mass climbed when the beam pushed on it, as if the hull grew denser the harder it was looked at. Its temperature held perfectly flat across 4 kilometers of metal, every plate the exact same cold, which no honest ship could manage, because honest ships ran hot at the engines and cold at the prow, and warm where the crew lived. The cold Meridian was all one temperature, top to bottom, as if it were not a machine at all, but a single solid intention wearing the shape of a ship. It is reading as one object, Brightwater 6 said, and the young surveyor's words trembled through the link. Not a hull and an engine, and a crew. One object. The memory has nothing that reads as one object at this scale. Nothing that big is ever one thing. Even a moon is layers. This is one thing. Then it was made by something that thinks in one thing, Stillwater 3rd said, and we are about to meet how it thinks. The Concorde tried, then, to do what it always did when a fact would not fit. It tried to file the cold Meridian under something it already knew. It reached into the memory and pulled up every great threat the Vol had ever survived, the iron swarms of the early ages, the singing plague that had taken 3 worlds, the patient cold things that lived between the stars and had to be bargained with rather than fought. It laid each of those old terrors beside the gray ship, hoping to find a shape that matched, a precedent, a page in the long book that said, "This has happened before, and here is what we did." There was nothing. The cold Meridian matched none of them. It was not a swarm, not a plague, not a thing between the stars. It was a single-made object, crude and steered, 4 kilometers long, and the memory, for the first time in its endless life, turned over its last page and found the page after it blank. A blank page, to the Vol, was the most frightening thing in the universe. A blank page meant the memory was not complete, and if the memory was not complete, then the god was not a god, and the armor was not armor, and the Concorde was not safe, and had never been safe, and had simply not yet met the thing that would teach it so. Then a voice came across the gap. It came on the standard hail channel, the same channel the Concorde had used to demand the ship's origin, and it was not the cluster voice, and it was not any Vol mind. It was a single voice, flat and calm and unbothered, and it spoke in the blocky plain script that the translation lattice had only just learned to read. "You are scanning my ship," the voice said. The whole Concorde went still. 40,000 minds, used to never being alone, felt for one instant the strange cold weight of being addressed by something outside themselves, something that was not part of the shared mind, and never would be. It was a sensation the Vol had no name for, because the Vol were never spoken to from outside. They absorbed, they filed, they did not get talked to. And now a single voice had reached across the dark and addressed them as if they were the small thing in the room. "You are scanning my ship," the voice said again, patient, as if repeating it to a child. "You have been scanning her for 19 minutes. I let you, because I wanted to be sure you understood what you were looking at before anything happened. You do not understand, so I will tell you once." Listener Ninth carried the voice to all the linked minds, and all the linked minds heard it together, and the translation lattice put a name to the speaker from the way the crew addressed her in the background traffic the beam had pulled from the hull. Her name was Captain Vera Okonkwo, and she commanded the cold Meridian, and she sounded tired. The beam had pulled in more than her voice. It had pulled in the sound of her bridge, faint behind her words, and the Concorde heard it without understanding what it meant. There was no alarm on that bridge, no raised voices, no panic, no rush of a crew bracing for 40,000 enemies. There was a low murmur of routine, someone reading off a checklist, someone else answering, the calm, ordinary noise of people doing a job they had done many times. A crew of 40 was preparing to face the entire Vol Concorde, and they were doing it the way the Vol tended a beacon, without fear, because for them it was simply Tuesday. That, more than the swallowed reactor, more than the impossible mass, was the thing that should have warned the Concorde. A frightened enemy fights hard. A calm one has already won, and is only waiting for you to notice. "My ship is 4 kilometers long," the captain said. "She has fought in 9 wars. She has been holed 1,100 times, and she has never once been boarded. The reason your scanners cannot read her reactor is that her reactor is not the kind of thing your scanners were built to read, and the reason your memory has no record of her is that the last species to record her does not exist anymore. I am telling you this so that you have the chance to do the only smart thing left. Stop scanning. Turn around. Forget you saw her." The cluster voice answered, because the Concorde could not help but answer. It was a thing of pride, and pride does not turn around. "You are one ship," the cluster voice said, throwing the words across the gap. "You are alone in our space. You will identify your maker world and submit to inspection, or you will be removed. There are 40,000 of us watching you. There are 900 Vol cruisers within a single jump of this belt. You are one ship." There was a pause. Then Captain Okonkwo did something that froze the shared mind solid. She laughed. It was a short laugh, dry and quiet, the laugh of someone who has heard a thing many times before, and is tired of hearing it. And Listener Ninth, riding the scout mind threadbare, with the captain's voice running through 40,000 linked observers, understood for the first time that the contempt at the start of the encounter had been flowing the wrong way. The Concorde had laughed at the small ship. The small ship had been waiting the whole time to laugh back. "One ship," the captain said. "You keep saying that like it is the comfort. Let me tell you about the last fleet that said it. They had a number too. Theirs was bigger than yours. Listener, are you carrying this?" The Concorde did not understand the question, because the Concorde did not know that Listener Ninth existed as a separate thing, a single mind among the 40,000. But Listener Ninth understood. Somehow the human captain had reached past the cluster voice and the shared will and spoken to the one mind that was carrying her words to all the rest. Somehow she knew there was a listener. For a long moment, Listener Ninth did not answer, because it did not know if it was allowed to. The Concorde spoke with one voice. A single mind speaking on its own was a thing that simply did not happen, a thing the shared self had no permission for, because there were no single selves to grant permission. And yet the captain had asked, and the asking had been aimed, with terrible precision, at the one thread in the crowd that was already, without knowing it, beginning to come loose. "I am carrying this," Listener Ninth answered, before it could stop itself, before the Concorde could decide whether it was allowed to. A ripple went through the linked minds, a small confusion. 40,000 observers feeling one of their own, speak with a voice that was its own. The cluster voice tried for one instant to silence it, to fold the rogue thread back into the hole, the way the Concorde smoothed over any mind that strayed. It could not. The captain's words were already inside Listener Ninth, and a mind that has been spoken to alone, once, cannot be made fully shared again. The Concorde did not understand what had happened. It only felt the small wrongness of a thread it could no longer perfectly pull, and it had too many other terrors to spend its fear on that one. "Good," the captain said. "Then carry this too. When this is over, One of you should remember it right. So here it is. We did not come to your belt by accident. We have been following a signal for 3 years. A distress call, a small one, from a small ship. A survey crew of 41 people who went quiet at the edge of your space 11 months ago. We came to find out what happened to them. And about an hour ago, your survey craft were kind enough to scan their hull for us. Because you keep their hull. You took it. You filed it. You added the people who flew it to your memory like specimens. The shared mind recoiled. Listener Ninth felt the recoil and felt, underneath it, the cold, awful pull of recognition, because the memory did hold such a thing. A small alien craft, taken near the outer beacons 11 months past, its crew of 41 catalogued and stored, its hull stripped and shelved as a curiosity. The Concorde took such ships often. It was how the memory grew. No one in the 40,000 had thought of it as a debt. The Concorde did not think in debts, it thought in facts. The memory surfaced the file now, because the captain had named it, and naming a thing brought it up. Listener Ninth saw it the way all 40,000 saw it, all at once. The small ship, the 41 shapes inside it, soft and warm and frightened, recorded in their last hours. The standard procedure followed exactly: scan, catalog, strip, shelve. There had been a transmission, the file noted, a repeating signal on an open band, growing weaker, then silent. The Concorde had recorded the signal too. It had filed it under acoustic phenomena. It had never once asked what the signal was asking. It had been asking for help. The memory held the proof and had never read it. You see it now, Captain Okonkwo said quietly. I felt your minds change. You found the file. Good. Then you understand that I am not here to inspect or to submit or to identify my maker world. I am here because 41 people called for help, and the call took 3 years to reach the right ship, and the right ship came. We always come. It just takes us a while. You are one ship, the cluster voice said, but the words had lost their certainty now, and Listener Ninth could feel 40,000 minds straining against the sound of their own argument. I am one ship, the captain agreed. That is true. I want you to hold on to that, because in about 4 minutes, every Vol mind in this belt is going to learn exactly what one ship is worth, and I do not want you telling yourselves afterward that we cheated by bringing a fleet. We did not bring a fleet. We did not need to. We brought the cold Meridian. Listener, last warning, and I mean it kindly. Pull your scout craft back. The ones close to me are going to have a hard few minutes, and I would rather you watched from a distance. You are the one who has to remember this. Stillwater Third's voice rose through the shared mind, urgent now, no longer slow. Pull back. All survey craft, pull back. Cut the beams, do as it says. I have ridden these craft for 200 years, and I am telling you, with everything I am, that we have made a mistake we cannot afford. Pull back. The beacon behind the nearest Hive world tried, too late, to do the wise thing. It began to shut down its own array, to go dark, to stop being a thing the gray ship might want to silence. Listener Ninth felt the beacon minds scramble, felt them try to fold themselves small and quiet, the way a creature freezes when a hunter looks its way. But the Concorde was one will, and the larger part of that will had not yet given the order to be afraid, and so the beacon's terror was overruled by the Concorde's pride, and the array stayed lit, and the beacon stayed loud, and it went on shouting the Concorde's strength into the dark, while the one ship that strength could not touch turned slowly toward it. For one moment, the Concorde wavered. Listener Ninth felt it, the great will splitting into two pulls, the proud part that wanted to hold, and the old wise part that wanted to flee. And for one moment, the two were even, and the encounter balanced on the edge of mercy. Then the cluster voice, proud to the last, gave a different order. Hold position, increase scan power, find a weakness. A ship cannot have no weakness. The memory says every ship has a weakness, find it. It was the memory that killed them, in the end. Not their guns, not their numbers, their faith that the memory was complete. The memory said every ship had a weakness, and the Concorde believed the memory more than it believed its own fear, and so it held when it should have run. A younger species would have run on instinct. The Vol had traded instinct for the memory long ago, and the trade had served them for 900,000 years, and it failed them in the only 19 minutes that ever counted. And the Concorde, being one will, obeyed the larger part of itself, and the survey craft held, and the beams burned brighter, and 4 arrays poured everything they had into the old gray hull of the cold Meridian at point-blank range. The patient red light on the prow brightened. A second light woke beside it, then a third, then a row of them, marching back along the dorsal line, and behind each light, a gun port that had stayed shut through the whole encounter began, slowly, with the calm of a thing that has done this 1,000 times, to slide open. "The guns," Brightwater Sixth breathed. "It is opening the guns. It is finally opening the guns." "No," said Stillwater Third, and the old observer's words were almost gentle, almost mourning. "Child, look at how many it is opening. It is not arming to fight us. There is no fight here. It is arming the way you load a tool before a long job. We are the job." Listener Ninth counted the gun ports as they opened, because counting was the only thing it knew how to do with its terror, and it lost the count past 400, and the ports kept opening, calm and steady, more of them than the entire Vol war gathering carried between all 900 cruisers. 4 kilometers of hull, and every meter of it had been a weapon the whole time, folded shut, waiting, while the Concorde scanned it for a joke and called it small. Captain Okonkwo's voice came one last time across the gap, no longer addressed to the cluster voice, no longer addressed to the Concorde at all. It was addressed to the one listener she had found in the crowd. "Watch close," she said, "and when it is done, go home and tell them what scanning a human warship cost. Tell them all 40,000 of you. That is the only inspection that ever mattered." The power inside the cold Meridian, which had been climbing for 19 minutes like a slow and certain tide, reached the top of its long rise. And the tide came in. The first thing the Concorde lost was the 4 survey craft burning their beams into the hull. They did not explode. That was the horror of it. The thing Listener Ninth would never be able to make the other minds understand. The cold Meridian did not destroy them in fire and noise. The forward batteries spoke once, a single coordinated discharge from 40 gun ports at once, and where the survey craft had been, there was simply nothing. A clean absence. The space swept empty, as a hand sweeps crumbs from a table. The beams cut off midstream. The minds aboard them ended between one shared thought and the next, so fast that the Concorde felt them stop before it felt them die. It was worse than an explosion would have been. An explosion was a thing the memory could hold. Fire, debris, a death that took time and made a shape. This made no shape. 3 survey craft and their clusters of observers were part of the shared mind one instant, and were a clean nothing the next. And the Concorde, reaching for them out of 900,000 years of reflex, closed its great hand on empty space. Threadbare survived only because Listener Ninth, at the last instant, against the will of the cluster voice, had begun to pull it back. The scout mind ran, and Listener Ninth ran with it, and behind them, the cold Meridian came on through the dark, slow and patient and entirely awake, its 100 newly opened guns glowing red along a 4-kilometer flank, turning at last toward the nearest Vol beacon, and the Hive world that hung behind it. 40,000 minds watched it come, and not one of them was laughing now. The first beacon died, at a range the Concorde had believed was safe, and that was when the panic began to spread from world to world. Listener Ninth, fleeing with the scout mind threadbare, watched it happen from the only vantage that mattered now, the distance the captain had told it to keep. The Meridian belt was not a thing the soft species would have called a place. It was a long arc of 40 hive worlds strung across the dark, each one a hollowed moon packed with vol, each one linked to the next by a chain of beacons that carried the shared mind across the light years, so that all 40 worlds thought as one. The beacons were the nerves of the Concorde. Through them, 40,000 observers had become 400 million, an entire civilization thinking a single thought. The cold Meridian went for the nerves first. It did not race between the worlds. It moved at that same patient crawl, never hurried, and yet it arrived everywhere far too soon, because the beacons it killed could no longer carry warning ahead of it. The first beacon went dark, and a quarter of the Concorde went blind in the same instant. 400 million minds suddenly unable to feel 10 of their own worlds, the great shared self torn into pieces that could no longer touch. Listener Ninth felt those 10 worlds vanish from the shared mind, and it was not like the survey craft vanishing, which had been clean and instant. This was slower and far worse. The 10 worlds did not die. They simply went silent, cut off, and listener ninth could feel them still out there, 400 million minds suddenly alone, reaching for a shared self that was no longer there. The reaching was the terrible part. For 900,000 years a Vol had never reached for the Concord, and failed to find it. Now 10 worlds reached and found nothing, and the silence where the Concord should have been was the loudest thing listener ninth had ever heard. In the last instant, before the first beacon died, listener ninth felt one mind on the nearest blinded world try to send a message down the failing link. It was not a command, it was not a fact. It was a single frightened observer, a young one, reaching for the rest of the Concord to say only that it was afraid and did not want to be alone. The link cut before the message finished. Listener ninth carried the unfinished message for the rest of its life. It was the first time it had ever felt a single Vol ask, not the Concord, but it, one mind to another, for comfort. There had never been a reason to before. The Concord comforted itself by being many. Now, for the first time, there were single minds, and single minds needed each other, and the gray ship had not even fired a shot at a world yet. It had simply cut one nerve, and in cutting it, had created, in a heartbeat, the loneliest creatures the galaxy had ever held. "It knows our shape," Stillwater Third said, and the old observer's voice came thin now, carried on a thread of relay that the cold Meridian had not yet cut. "It is not attacking our ships. It is attacking what makes us one. It understood us in 19 minutes. It understood us better than we understand it." "How?" Brightwater Sixth said, and the young mind was barely holding together. "How did it understand us so fast? We have studied other species for thousands of years before we moved against them. It looked at us for 19 minutes. Because it was not studying our ships," Stillwater Third said. "It was studying us. The first thing it did was find the listener. It found the one mind carrying its words, and it spoke to that mind alone. A species that does that in the first minute is a species that already knows the shape of a hive. It has met us before. Not us. Things like us. And it remembered." That was the thought that finished the Concord's nerve. The cold Meridian had met hives before. The captain had said as much, in her tired, flat voice. The last fleet that counted itself and felt safe. The gray ship was not encountering the Vol. It was repeating something. The Vol were not the first shared mind to scan a human warship and call it small, and they would not be the last. And the ship knew exactly how the story went, because it had been the one to end it every time before. The Concord, what was left of it within listener ninth's reach, finally did the thing pride had refused to let it do. It called the fleet. 900 Vol cruisers lay within a single jump of the belt, and now they came, folding in from the dark in their hundreds, the largest war gathering the Concord had assembled in 11,000 years. They came in a sphere, the way the Concord always fought, every cruiser linked to every other, every gun aimed by the shared mind, so that 900 ships fired as one weapon. It was a tactic that had ended a dozen wars. No single enemy had ever survived the closing of the Vol sphere. The memory was certain of it. The memory had a file. Listener ninth watched the sphere close around the cold Meridian, 900 cruisers contracting on one old gray hull, and for one bright moment, the whole Concord let itself believe again. 900 to 1. Surely. Surely no ship, however strange, however deep its swallowed power, could stand against the closing of the sphere. The memory had never been wrong about the sphere. The sphere was the proof that enough was a number. It had always been a number. It had to be a number, or nothing the Concord believed was true. The cold Meridian did not try to stand against it. It went through it. Listener ninth had no word for what it saw, and neither did the memory, and neither would any Vol who lived to hear the telling. The old warship did not stop at the edge of the sphere and trade fire. It chose a point on the sphere, and it accelerated, all at once, from that patient crawl to a speed that should have torn it apart, and it drove straight into the wall of 900 cruisers, like a fist through paper. Its forward batteries swept the path clear ahead of it. Its flanks shrugged off everything the sphere poured into them, 10,000 beams, and 100,000 missiles breaking against 4 kilometers of layered armor that had been holed 1,100 times, and had learned, each time, to be harder. It crossed the entire diameter of the sphere in under a minute, and where it passed, cruisers simply ended, and behind it, the sphere collapsed inward on the hole it had made, and tore itself apart trying to close a gap that was no longer there. In 90 seconds, the Vol war gathering of 900 cruisers ceased to be a fleet. It became debris, and survivors, and silence on 100 channels at once. The cold Meridian came out the far side of the wreck without slowing, turned its patient nose toward the next beacon in the chain, and went on. Listener Ninth felt the sphere die through the shared mind, all 900 cruisers at once, and something in the Concorde broke that did not mend. It was not the loss of the ships, though that was the greatest single loss in 11,000 years. It was the loss of the belief. The sphere had been the proof. The sphere had said, "Enough is a number," and the gray ship had crossed the sphere in 90 seconds without slowing, and now the proof was gone, and the Concorde stood in the dark holding the wreck of the one idea it had built everything on. It was Stillwater Third that Listener Ninth lost in the crossing. The old observer had ridden one of the sphere cruisers, had insisted on it, had wanted to be where the decision was made so that wisdom might still reach the will in time. The wisdom had reached it. The will had not listened. And when the gray ship crossed the sphere, the old observer ended with it, and the last thing Listener Ninth felt from the 200-year mind was not fear and not anger, but a kind of bitter, final clarity. We were a great people, Stillwater Third sent, in the half-second it had left, and we were undone by the one thing greatness can never see, which is the edge of what it knows. Tell it right, child. You are the only one of us who was listening when it mattered. And then the old observer was gone, folded into the clean nothing the gray ship left behind it, and Listener Ninth was, in every way that counted now, alone. How many? The cluster voice said, and it was a smaller voice now, the will of a Concorde that had lost half its body and most of its certainty. How many cruisers remain? The answer came back through the thinning relay, and Listener Ninth carried it, because no one else could bear to. None that will fight. They are scattering. The shared mind cannot hold them. They are too afraid, and fear is private, and a private mind cannot be aimed. That was the thing the cold Meridian had understood, that the Concorde had not. The shared mind was the Vol's great strength, and it was their throat. A species that thought as one could be made to feel as one, and a species that felt fear as one became. All at once, 400 million separate panicking minds, with no will to bind them. The captain had not needed to destroy 400 million Vol. She had only needed to teach them, all at the same instant, the single fact their memory had never held. That they could lose. Listener Ninth felt that fact spread across the surviving worlds like a stain. Each beacon that fell sent its terror down the chain before it died. Each cruiser that scattered carried home the image of the gray hull passing through the sphere. The Concorde had spent 900,000 years building a memory that held everything, and now the newest entry in that memory, burning brighter than all the others, was the cold Meridian, and there was no way to file it that made it small. On the third Hive world the chain reached, the Concorde tried to bargain. It came through on the standard hail. The cluster voice gathered from the remaining worlds, stripped of all its pride now, formal and careful and afraid. Human ship, cold Meridian, we acknowledge an error. We acknowledge the survey crew, the 41, taken 11 months past. We return them. We return their hull. We return everything filed from them. We open our memory to you. Name your restitution, and it is done. Only stop. Captain Okonkwo's voice answered, and Listener Ninth had been listening to that voice long enough now to hear the change in it. It had never been triumphant. It was tired in a deeper way than before. The tiredness of someone doing a thing she had done too many times, and wished she did not have to do again. You took 41 people who called for help, the captain said. You did not answer the call. You filed it. You have a memory that holds 900,000 years, and in all that memory, you never once learned the one thing that would have kept this from happening. So I am going to teach it to you now, because clearly, no one else ever will. Are you carrying this, listener? I am carrying this, Listener Ninth said. When something small calls for help, the captain said, you answer it. You do not measure it. You do not file it. You do not decide whether it is worth your trouble. You answer. Because one day, the thing that comes to answer for it might be us, and we keep our appointments. That is the lesson. That is the whole of it. Everything happening to your belt right now is just the part where you learn it the hard way. We have offered everything, the cluster voice said. What more is there? Nothing more, the captain said. There never was. You did not understand me. I did not come to be paid. The 41 are dead. You cannot return them. You can only return their hull, and you already gave me that when you scanned it. I came to make sure that the next species you find, drifting and silent at the edge of your space, you think twice before you file it. I cannot make you kind, but I can make you careful. Careful is what the dead settle for. And the cold Meridian killed the third beacon, and another 10 worlds went blind, and the great shared mind of the Vol Concord, which had ruled the Meridian belt for 900,000 years, began at last to come apart for good. Between the third world and the fourth, the Concord tried one last thing that was not pride, and was not bargaining. It tried to run. Not the worlds, which could not move, but the minds. Across the still-linked belt, a great current rose in the shared mind, a wordless animal urge that the Vol had never felt before, because the Vol had never had anywhere to run from. Now 400 million minds wanted, all at once, to not be where the gray ship was going, and the wanting had nowhere to go, because a hive world is a hollowed moon, and a moon does not flee. So the urge turned inward and became something worse. The minds tried to run inside themselves. They tried to pull back from the shared mind, to disconnect before the gray ship disconnected them, to choose the loneliness, rather than have it chosen for them, as if going alone by their own hand might hurt less than being cut. Listener Ninth felt them try, and felt them fail, because a Vol did not know how to be alone, had never once practiced it, and could no more disconnect itself from the Concord than a soft creature could choose to stop its own heart. They reached for solitude, and recoiled from it, and reached again. 400 million minds learning in their last linked hour the thing Listener Ninth had been learning all day, that being one was a skill, and that they had never been taught it, and that the gray ship was about to teach it to all of them at once, whether they were ready or not. It is not even cruel, Brightwater Sixth said, and the young surveyor's voice had gone strange and flat, the voice of a mind that has seen past its own terror into something colder. That is the part I cannot hold. If it were cruel I could hate it, and the hating would help. It is not cruel. It is only certain. It is doing exactly what it came to do. No more, no less. And it would do exactly the same to anything that did what we did. We are not its enemy. We are its errand. We spent 900,000 years certain we were the most important thing in our corner of the dark. And to the thing that is unmaking us, we are an errand. It is running on the way to somewhere else. Listener Ninth understood. It would spend 40 years making sure its people understood. But in that moment, fleeing alongside the dying chain, it could only carry the young mind's words, and feel the awful accuracy of them settle into the place where its certainty used to live. Listener Ninth held the scout mind threadbare at its distance, and did not look away. It had been told to watch, and it was the kind of mind that did what it was told, and somewhere in the long, terrible passage of that day, it had stopped being only a part of the Concord, and started becoming a thing the Concord had never made room for. A witness. A single mind, alone, carrying a truth no shared memory wanted to hold. There was a strange clarity in it, Listener Ninth found, in being one mind alone. The shared mind had always smoothed everything, averaged every fear into the calm of the whole, so that no Vol ever felt anything too sharply. Alone, Listener Ninth felt everything sharply. It felt the terror, yes, but it also felt, for the first time, the simple act of choosing. The Concord had never chosen. It had only ever done what the larger part of itself wanted. Listener Ninth, cut loose, chose to watch, chose to stay, chose to carry. And the choosing was the most alive it had ever been. The cold Meridian moved down the chain of worlds, patient and gray and unhurried, and one by one, the lights of the Meridian belt went out behind it. Not the worlds. The captain did not touch the worlds. 400 million Vol lived on those 40 hollowed moons, and the cold Meridian passed every one of them, and fired on none. It killed only the beacons. It killed only the thing that made the Concord one. It left 400 million minds alive and whole, and utterly, permanently alone, scattered across 40 worlds that could no longer hear each other. Every Vol for the first time in 900,000 years. A single self in a single skull, with nothing in its head but its own thoughts and the memory of the gray ship passing. That, Listener ninth understood, was the restitution. Not death. Loneliness. The captain had taken from the Concorde the one thing it had never imagined losing, and she had done it so precisely, so patiently, that there was no way to call it anything but justice. She could have cracked the worlds. A ship that crossed the sphere in 90 seconds could have ended 400 million lives in an afternoon. She did not. She ended their certainty and left their lives, because the lives were not the debt, and the captain only ever collected exactly what was owed. 40 hive worlds, 40 beacons. The cold Meridian was on the 30th now, and it had not yet been touched. On the 30th world, the last proud fragment of the Concorde made its last stand, and it made it the only way pride knows how. It threw everything it had left at the gray ship at once. Listener ninth felt the gathering through the thinning relay, and for a moment, the old wonder came back, because even broken, even afraid, the Vol could still make something terrible. The 30 surviving worlds that could still feel each other pooled what cruisers they had, every armed hull that had not scattered, every defense platform, every beacon fort and mine layer and orbital gun, the belt had built across 900,000 years of certainty. It was not a sphere this time. The shared mind was too torn to manage a sphere. It was simply a wall, the densest wall of metal and fire the Concorde had ever raised, hung across the path between the 29th beacon and the 30th. And behind it, the 30 worlds put every gun on full, and every mind on the trigger, and waited for the cold Meridian to come. It was a magnificent thing, the wall. Listener ninth would say so, in the long years of telling, and it would not be flattering the dead. 3,000 guns, 600 platforms, a barrier of metal so deep that the stars behind it dimmed. The Vol had never built anything like it, because the Vol had never needed to, because nothing had ever made it this far. It was the work of a species reaching the very bottom of its strength, and finding, down there, more strength than it had known it had. In any other story, against any other enemy, the wall would have been the end of the threat. It was the kind of thing the memory was made to record as a victory. There was a terrible courage in it too, and Listener ninth never failed to name that courage when it told the day. The minds behind the wall knew, by then, what had happened to the sphere. They had felt 900 cruisers die in 90 seconds. They built the wall anyway, and they stood behind it anyway, not because they believed it would hold, but because they were a proud people at the end of their pride, and there was nothing left to do with the last of it but spend it well. The Concorde, which had never once been brave, because bravery requires the possibility of loss, and the Concorde had never imagined loss, learned bravery in its final hour. It learned it too late to be saved by it, but it learned it, and Listener ninth thought that mattered, and said so. It came. Captain Okonkwo did not hail them first this time. There was nothing left to say that she had not already said, and Listener ninth understood that too. The captain talked when talk might still change a thing. When it could not, she stopped talking and did the work. The gray ship slid toward the wall at its patient crawl, and then, 200 kilometers out, it stopped. For the first time in the whole long day, the cold Meridian stopped. The wall held its fire, because the shared mind did not understand, and a thing it does not understand makes the Concorde hesitate even now. 4 kilometers of scarred gray metal hung motionless in the dark before the greatest wall of force the Vol had ever built, and for 10 full seconds nothing happened at all. Listener ninth held its breath, in the way a single mind learns to, and waited. And the 30 worlds waited, and the wall waited. 3,000 guns trained on one old ship that simply sat there and looked at them. Then every gun port on the cold Meridian opened at once. Listener ninth had seen the forward batteries speak. It had seen the flanks shrug off a fleet. It had not seen the whole ship open, all at once. Every battery on every face of that 4-kilometer hull sliding back to reveal what had been waiting behind the armor the entire time. The Concorde's scanners, what remained of them, finally got their deep reading, finally saw inside, and what they saw broke the last of the shared mind's nerve. The cold Meridian was not a ship with guns. The cold Meridian was guns, all the way down, a single weapon 4 kilometers long that had been folded into the shape of a warship so that it could travel, and the crew of 40 inside it were not its operators so much as its conscience, the small living thing that decided when the weapon was allowed to speak. It spoke. The wall did not fall. Walls fall. This did not fall. The single coordinated discharge of the cold Meridian's full broadside crossed 200 kilometers in an instant, and the wall was simply gone. Not broken, not scattered. Gone. Every cruiser and platform and beacon fort and mine layer in it ended in the same heartbeat. The densest defense the Vol had ever raised erased so cleanly that the dark behind it was untouched, the stars beyond shining steady through the space where a wall had been a second before. The recoil should have torn the cold Meridian apart. It did not. The ship rode its own broadside backward a few kilometers, settled, corrected, and came on again at its patient crawl, the gun ports sliding shut one by one, as if the weapon were a tool being folded away after a single clean cut. The 30 worlds felt the wall die, all at once, through the shared mind, and the shared mind broke. It did not break in panic this time. It had no panic left. It broke in understanding, which was worse. 400 million Vol, or what could still feel each other of them, arrived in the same instant at the same final fact, and the fact was this. There was no force the Concorde could raise that the cold Meridian could not erase. There was no number large enough. There was no wall thick enough. The memory had been wrong about the deepest thing it believed, the thing under all its files, the thing it had never thought to question in 900,000 years. The Concorde had believed that enough was a number, that with enough ships, enough guns, enough mines, anything could be beaten. The gray ship had proven, patiently, world by world, that enough was not a number, that some things were simply not on the scale at all. Listener Ninth felt the understanding land, and it felt, underneath the terror, something almost like grief, not for the wall, for the idea. The Vol had been a great people, in their way. They had built a memory that held the whole long story of their corner of the galaxy. They had ruled a belt of 40 worlds in peace, for longer than most species lasted at all, and the thing that ruined them was not cruelty and not weakness. It was a single blind spot, one fact they had never thought to learn, and they had carried that blind spot for 900,000 years without ever once tripping over it, because nothing had ever been large enough to make them trip, until the day a small voice called for help, and the right ship came. "What is it?" the cluster voice said, and it was barely a voice now, a whisper from 30 failing worlds. "What is the cold Meridian? Tell us what it is. We will let you go. Only tell us what it is." And Captain Okonkwo, who had let the Concorde scan her ship for 19 minutes and had answered every question it asked, answered this one too, because it was the only question that had ever mattered, and the only one the Concorde had never thought to ask. "She is old," the captain said. "That is the part you keep missing. You keep trying to file her by her size and her guns, and those are not what she is. She is old. My grandmother served on her. Her grandmother helped build her. The cold Meridian has been answering distress calls for 400 years, and in 400 years she has crossed a great deal of space and met a great many fleets that counted themselves and felt safe. You are not the first wall. You are not the largest. You are only the most recent. That is what she is. She is the ship that comes when something small calls for help, and she has been coming for so long that there is nothing left in the dark that can stop her from arriving." 400 years, the cluster voice breathed. "We have ruled this belt for 900,000. "I know," the captain said, and there was no cruelty in it, only that deep tiredness. 900,000 years, and you spent them building a memory that held everything except the thing that would have saved you. You filed every fact in the galaxy. You never learned the one that matters. I am sorry. I truly am. But sorry does not bring back the 41, and careful is what the dead settle for. And after today, you will be careful." "How?" the cluster voice said, and it was no longer bargaining now, only asking, the way a thing asks at the very end, when there is nothing left to gain by the answer. How does a ship cross 400 years and never lose? Every ship loses. The memory says every ship loses, in the end. Everything we have ever recorded loses, in the end. "Then your memory is missing more than one fact," the captain said. "She loses. She has lost. She has been holed 1,100 times, and every one of those holes was a fight she did not walk away from clean. She lost the crew that built her. She lost my grandmother. She has lost more people than your whole belt holds, across 400 years, one funeral at a time. She loses constantly. She just never stops. That is the part you cannot file, because your memory only records who won the battle. It never thought to record who kept going afterward. That is the fact under all the others. We lose, and we keep coming, and after 400 years of keeping coming, there is nothing left that can make us stop. You measured her guns. You should have measured her funerals. The shared mind had no answer for that, because the memory had no file for it, because the Concorde had never once in 900,000 years lost anything it could not replace, and so it had never learned the only strength that mattered, which was the strength of a thing that loses and continues. Listener Ninth turned the words over in its small, lonely self and understood them in a way the dying cluster voice could not, because Listener Ninth had just learned, in the last hour, exactly what it was to lose and continue. It had lost Stillwater Third. It had lost the shared mind. It had lost the only kind of self it had ever known how to be. And it was still here, still flying, still carrying. The captain had not been describing only her ship. She had been describing the single mind, any single mind, the thing the Vol had always pitied and never understood. A creature that can lose and continue is a creature that cannot, in the end, be beaten, because beating it only teaches it to continue harder. The Concorde had been unbeatable in the way a thing that has never been tested is unbeatable, which is to say, not at all. The gray ship was unbeatable in the only way that was real, which was that it had been beaten 1,000 times and had simply refused to accept any of them as final. Listener Ninth, holding threadbare at its distance, felt the 30th beacon die, and 10 more worlds went silent, and now only the last 10 remained linked, the far end of the belt, the worlds the cold Meridian had not yet reached. And then the gray ship did the thing that Listener Ninth would carry to the end of its life. It stopped going down the chain. The cold Meridian reached the 31st beacon, and it did not kill it. It came to a halt before it, that patient gray hull hanging in the dark, gun ports shut, the red light on its prow steady and calm. 10 worlds waited to die. They did not die. The captain's voice came across the gap one last time, and this time it was not addressed to the cluster voice, and it was not addressed to the dying Concorde. It was addressed, as it had been from the very first, to the one mind in all the 40,000 that had carried every word. "Listener," the captain said, "are you still there?" "I am still here," Listener Ninth answered. Its voice shook. It was a single mind now, almost entirely alone, the great shared self it had been born into, reduced to a handful of failing threads. And for the first time, it understood what the captain had been doing to its people, because it had become the thing she was making, a self, alone, carrying a truth. "I am going to leave the last 10 beacons standing," the captain said. "Do you understand why?" "No," Listener Ninth said. "Because someone has to be able to tell the others," the captain said. "There is no point in a lesson nobody survives to learn. I left 400 million of your people alive, scattered, careful, and now I am leaving them 10 beacons so that one day, when the fear has cooled, they can knit themselves back together enough to remember this and warn whoever comes after them. I did not come to end the Vol. I came to change them. There is a difference, and you are the proof of it. 20 minutes ago you were one mind in a crowd that could not imagine being wrong. Now you are a witness. That is the only kind of mind that ever learns anything." The cold Meridian began, slowly, to turn. Not toward the last 10 worlds, away from them. The gray ship swung its scarred prow around toward the deep dark beyond the belt, toward the long empty space it had crossed to get here, toward wherever the next small voice would call from next. "There is one more thing," the captain said. "The hull you kept, the survey crew of 41, you scanned it for me when this began, and I have her coordinates now. I am going to take her home. 11 months your people kept her on a shelf. She has waited long enough. When you rebuild your memory, listener, put her in it first. 41 names, the ones you filed as specimens. Make them the first entry in the new memory, before the cold Meridian, before the wall, before any of it. Because they are the reason all of this happened, and a memory that forgets them again will earn all of it again. Can you do that?" "I can do that," Listener Ninth said, and it was a promise. The first promise a single Vol mind had made in 900,000 years, and it meant it with the whole of its small, lonely self. "Good," the captain said. "Then we are done here. Watch us go, and when you tell it right." The cold Meridian's engines woke. The great blunt cones at her stern, dark and cold through the whole long day, lit at last with a deep, steady glow, and the 4-kilometer hull began to move out toward the dark, gathering speed, patient even now, in no hurry at all, because it had already done the thing it came to do, and there was no one left who could keep it from leaving. Behind it, the Meridian belt lay broken and silent and alive. 40 hive worlds, 30 of them blind, 10 of them still faintly linked. 400 million vol, every one of them alone for the first time, every one of them carrying the same new fact in the same new private skull. And one scout mind, threadbare, holding its distance, with one listener inside it, watching the gray ship go. The cold Meridian was already a fading point of light when listener ninth turned the scout mind threadbare toward home, and home was a thing that no longer existed. There was no Concord to return to. That was the first lesson of being alone, and it came hard. For 900,000 years a Vol had never had to ask where it belonged, because it belonged everywhere the shared mind reached, and the shared mind reached across 40 worlds, and now the shared mind reached across 10, faintly, and listener ninth was not even sure it could still touch those. It steered the little survey craft back toward the belt through a silence it had never known, and the silence was the worst weapon the captain had used, worse than the broadside that erased the wall, worse than the fist through the sphere. The captain had not killed listener ninth's people. She had made them quiet. She had given 400 million minds the gift, the curse, the simple unbearable fact of being one. Listener ninth flew home through that quiet, and tried to understand what it was now. It passed the wreck of the sphere on the way, the 900 cruisers, drifting in a vast slow cloud, where the gray ship had crossed them. There were survivors out there. The captain had not hunted survivors. Listener ninth could feel them, faintly, scattered single minds clinging to broken hulls, each one alone, each one carrying the same image of the gray ship passing through. They reached for the shared mind, the way every Vol reached, and they found nothing, and listener ninth felt them find nothing, hundreds of them, and could do nothing but witness it. That was the shape of the day now, witnessing. The Concord had spent 900,000 years never having to watch its own people suffer alone, because no Vol had ever suffered alone. Now they all did, and listener ninth, alone among them, had learned how to bear it, because the captain had taught it how, one terrible conversation at a time. There was a moment, somewhere in that long flight home, that listener ninth never told the young ones about, because it was too private, and a single mind, it had learned, was allowed to keep some things only for itself. Drifting through the wreck, surrounded by the lonely reaching of hundreds of its own kind, listener ninth had felt, for the first time in its life, entirely afraid, and entirely alone in that fear, with no shared mind to pool it into and smooth it away. And it had survived the fear. It had simply held it, alone, and gone on flying, and the holding had not killed it. That was the moment it stopped mourning the Concord, because it understood, in that moment, that the soft species in the gray ship had lived their whole lives like this, every one of them a single self, holding its own fear alone, and they had not been weakened by it. They had been made by it. The thing the Vol had always pitied in other species, the loneliness of the single mind, was the very thing that had built a ship that could not be stopped. The Concord had thought being many made it strong. It had never once considered what being one might make a creature capable of, if that creature simply refused to stop. As Threadbare drew nearer the belt, listener ninth slowed and let the scout mind drift, and did a thing no Vol had ever done, because no Vol had ever been alone enough to need to. It spoke to the survivors, not as the Concord, gathering them in, as one mind, reaching for another, across the small private distance between two single selves. It found the nearest broken hull and the lonely mind clinging to it, and it sent, simply, "You are not the only one. I am here too. I am also alone. We can be alone together," which is a thing our people never knew how to be, and which we will have to learn, and I will help you learn it. The mind on the broken hull received the message, and did not understand it at first, because there were no words in the old shared language for one mind comforting another, and then it understood, the way a creature understands warmth before it has a name for it, and it sent back the only thing it had, which was, "Do not go." And listener ninth did not go. It stayed, drifting in the wreck, one small mind keeping another small mind company in the dark. until a rescue craft came, and it understood then that this, too, was something the gray ship had taught, not by saying it, but by making a galaxy in which it had to be learned. It reached the nearest of the 10 worlds, still faintly linked, a hollowed moon, called Deepwater, that hung at the far end of the belt, and it brought Threadbare down into the great receiving cavern, where survey craft had docked for longer than the soft species had been a species. The cavern was full of vol. They had felt the scout mind coming. They could still feel that much, the 10 worlds, through the beacons the captain had spared. And they reached for Listener Ninth the way the Concorde had always reached, hungry for what it carried, hungry to pool the truth into the shared memory and make it everyone's at once. And Listener Ninth did the second thing no single vol had ever done. It chose how to tell. The old way, the only way the Concorde had ever known, would have been simply to open, to let the memory take the whole of the day at once, every fact and every number, the 4 kilometers and the 9 wars and the 1,100 holes and the 900 cruisers, and the wall and the broadside, all of it poured in raw, filed, made small by being made complete. That was how the Concorde had survived 900,000 years. It took every terror, and it filed it until the terror was only a fact, and a fact cannot frighten you. And so the Concorde had never been afraid of anything, and had walked, certain and proud, straight into the one thing it should have feared. Listener Ninth did not open that way. It held the day inside itself, the whole of it, and it shaped the telling, the way the captain had shaped her warnings, choosing what came first. And what it put first was not the size of the ship or the death of the fleet. What it put first, into the reaching minds of the 10 surviving worlds, was a list of 41 names. The survey crew, the small ship taken 11 months past, catalogued and shelved, the call that was filed instead of answered. Listener Ninth had pulled the names from the memory before the memory broke, and now it gave them to its people first, before anything else, before the gray ship, before the wall, the way the captain had asked. 41 names that the Concorde had once recorded as specimens, given now as the first entry in whatever new memory the vol would build, so that the new memory would begin where the old one should have, with a small voice that called for help and was not answered. The 10 worlds received the names, and the 10 worlds were silent, and it was a different silence than before. It was the silence of a thing learning. Then Listener Ninth told the rest. It told it right, the way it had promised. It did not tell it as a list of facts to be filed and forgotten. It told it as a thing that had happened, that had a shape and a cost and a meaning. And the meaning was the lesson the captain had taught at the price of a fleet and a sphere and a wall, and the whole proud certainty of a species. When something small calls for help, you answer it. You do not measure it. You do not file it. You do not decide whether it is worth your trouble. Because one day the thing that comes to answer for it might be older than your memory, and larger than your scale, and entirely beyond your power to stop, and it will keep its appointment, and you will learn the lesson the hard way, the way the dead settle for. The 10 worlds carried it, and because Listener Ninth had told it right, the 10 worlds did not file it small. They held it the way it deserved to be held, large and terrible and true, and they began, slowly, the long work of becoming a people who would never need to learn it again. It was not easy work, and it was not quick. There were vol on those 10 worlds who wanted, more than anything, to rebuild the old Concorde exactly as it had been, to knit the 40 worlds back into one great certain mind, and pretend the gray ship had never come. They argued that the blind spot had been a small thing, a single fact, easily added now, and that with the fact added, the old way could go on. Listener Ninth argued against them, and it was the strangest thing, a single vol arguing against the shared will, because no vol had ever had a will of its own to argue with. But Listener Ninth had one now, and it used it, and it said the same thing every time. The fact was never the point. A memory that holds a billion facts and learns nothing from any of them is what nearly ended us. The gray ship did not punish us for missing a fact. It punished us for being the kind of mind that could miss it. If we rebuild the same mind, we will miss the next one, and there will not always be 10 beacons left standing. The argument went on for years. It was a new thing among the vol, an argument that did not resolve into a single will within a heartbeat, an argument that took years, because the two sides were genuinely two sides, and neither could simply absorb the other. It was uncomfortable, and slow, and full of doubt. And it was the healthiest thing the species had done in 900,000 years, because a mind that can argue with itself is a mind that can be wrong and survive the discovery. The old Concorde had never been able to be wrong. That had been its glory and its grave. It took the Vol 40 years to knit the belt back together. They did it differently the second time. They built no sphere. They raised no walls. They rebuilt the beacons, 10 at first, then 20, then all 40. But they did not rebuild the old certainty, because the old certainty had nearly ended them, and they remembered why. The new Concorde was a quieter thing, slower to act, slower to scan, slower to decide that it understood. It kept, at its center, the one practice Listener Ninth had insisted on, the practice no other shared mind in the galaxy had ever kept. It listened to its single minds. It left room for one voice to disagree with all the others, because one voice disagreeing was what had saved it, and a mind with no room for a single dissenting voice was exactly the mind that had walked into the gray ship's guns. The first true test came in the 31st year, before the belt was whole, while the new Concorde was still only half itself. A survey craft at the rebuilt outer beacons found a small ship drifting silent in the dark, a battered little hull from a species the Vol did not know, going quiet at the edge of their space, exactly as the human ship had once gone quiet, exactly as the 41 had once gone quiet. The old Concorde would have scanned it and stripped it and shelved it without a single thought. The new Concorde froze. Listener Ninth, old now, felt the whole young half-built shared mind turn toward it at once, asking, because it did not yet trust itself to know. And Listener Ninth said the only thing it had ever really learned: answer it. Do not measure it. Do not file it. Answer it. So the Vol answered. They sent their fastest craft. They found a crew of 9 aboard the little hull, sick and frightened and nearly out of air, and they did not catalog them. They saved them. 9 lives, pulled out of the dark, the first lives the Vol had ever saved instead of recorded. And when the 9 were safe and breathing, and looking around in wonder at the strange many-minded people who had come for them, Listener Ninth understood that the lesson had finally, truly taken, and that the price the gray ship had charged had bought something real. Listener Ninth lived to see the 40th beacon lit. It was very old by then, old for a single Vol mind, which was a strange thing to be in a species that had only just learned how to be single minds at all. It had become, over those 40 years, the thing the captain had made it on the first day: a witness, the one who carried the day and told it right, again and again, to every world and every generation, until the telling was woven so deep into the new Concorde that no Vol would ever again look at something small and decide it was not worth answering. And in all those 40 years, the cold Meridian never came back. That was the part the young ones always asked about, when Listener Ninth told the day. They wanted to know if the gray ship watched them, if it was out there in the dark waiting to see whether the lesson had taken, ready to return if it had not. And Listener Ninth told them the truth, which was that it did not know, and that not knowing was the point. She did not stay to make sure, Listener Ninth would say. She did not threaten us with her return. She simply did the work she came to do, and took the 41 home, and left. She trusted us to become better, or she did not care whether we did, and I have never been able to decide which, and I have decided that the not being able to decide is itself the lesson. A small voice called for help. It took the call 3 years to reach the right ship. The right ship came, and it crossed the wreck of everything we were sure of, and it did not gloat, and it did not linger, and it did not ask to be paid. It only asked one mind to watch, and to remember, and to tell it right. I was that mind. I am still telling it right. That is the whole of my life, and it is enough, and it is more than 400 million of us thought we would ever have on the day the scan came back wrong. The young ones always asked one more thing, at the end, every time. They asked what the captain's last words had been when the gray ship turned for the dark. And Listener Ninth always answered the same way, because the words had not changed in 40 years and never would. She said, "Watch us go, and when you tell it right." And then the cold Meridian lit her engines, and she went out into the dark the way the tide goes out, slow and certain and in no hurry at all, because she had already done the thing she came to do. We were 900,000 years of certainty, 400 million minds, 40 worlds, 900 cruisers, and the greatest wall ever raised. She was 4 kilometers of old gray metal and 40 people who kept their appointments, and when it was over, she did not count what she had broken. She counted what she had carried home. 41 names. That was the number that mattered to her. Not our 40 worlds. Not our 900 cruisers. 41. I have spent my whole life making sure we never forget which number was the right one to count. Then the old witness would fall quiet, and the young ones would fall quiet with it, and out past the lit beacons of the rebuilt belt, the dark would hang there, deep and patient, the way it always did. Somewhere in that dark, 400 years old and counting, an old gray warship was still answering calls. It would be a long time reaching the next one. It always was. But it would reach it. The Vol had learned that much, and they had learned it the only way the proud ever do, and the price had been everything they were sure of, and the witness who carried it had never once, in 40 years of telling, called that price too high. A small voice calls for help. The right ship comes. It just takes a while. That was the new first entry in the memory of the Vol Concord, written above the 41 names, and the 4 kilometers, and the broken wall, and all the rest of it. The one line the whole long terrible day had been spent to teach. And 40 Hive worlds, who had once laughed at a single hull and scanned it for a joke, would never laugh at a small thing again.